Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome here to WMC this evening for this recital by the Marmen String Quartet. Absolutely delighted to have you back. I can start there straight away. So my name's James Slater. I'm the Artistic Director and Chief Executive here at the Centre, and I'm very pleased to welcome both you here, our lovely audience in the room, and somewhere out there, people listening from home on the live WMC Digital. So, as usual, we'll talk a little bit about the programme this evening. There'll be a bit of time for some Q&A with you if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask. And, of course, we'll talk a little bit about life as a string quartet. But to get us going, so let's just catch up a bit, shall we? So we were absolutely thrilled to have you as our young quartet in residence, I think in 2019, 2020, if I'm getting my history correct. The last time I heard you was an extraordinary weekend of Beethoven, where you played half the Beethoven quartets over 2 days, an absolutely wonderful, memorable event. I mean, I haven't seen you since then. So what have you been doing in the meantime?
Well, of course, COVID happened almost straight after that, which really stopped us in our tracks. I mean, we were due to perform about 120 concerts in that year, 2020. But luckily, we were due to do a full Beethoven cycle in Sweden, and I remember we popped to WNC to do the partial Beethoven cycle here halfway through that. So we basically went back to Sweden, we finished that cycle, and then it all just sort of fell out from under our feet, which was the case for everyone, really. So we didn't see each other for a while. Certain travel restrictions made it difficult for us to rehearse. And it was a difficult year or so, both for ourselves, dealing with the fact that we couldn't perform, and also for the quartet. We didn't make it through with all of our original members. But it's very, very nice to be back, to be on the other side now, with some wonderful new members in the quartet, and to be back sort of full swing. It feels like we basically stopped for an extended period, and then from about May 2021, it's felt like very full-time, basically ever since then, which has been really great. We've been really lucky to go all over the world. Maybe Johannes can say a word about where we've been.
Oh yes, well, we did a few competitions that the year before COVID, so in 2019, and so one of the things that came out of that was a residency in Dallas, actually in Texas. So I guess that was like the how do you call it, so we had a residency here, and then we continued with a residency in Dallas, Texas. So it was very different, but actually not that different. You know, music is the same everywhere around the world, and we enjoy that very much. And so we've been just traveling the world, basically the States and Canada, and we've been around in Europe quite a lot, and played in Berlin and in the Philharmonie, and we've also gone to Ireland quite a lot more than we used to, since our cellist is now Irish, so she has introduced us to that wonderful place. Yeah.
Well, you are a truly international string quartet now, and that's incredibly exciting. But I think today I'd like to get a little bit behind the scene and to ask you a few of the questions about life as a professional member of a string quartet. So really, where to start with this? But I think the first question is quite a hard one, is why do all string quartets sound different?
I think, actually, I don't think it's that hard to answer. It's a great question, though. I think that when you think about having a quartet, that's 4 different people, right? So already, if you think about having a duo, even just 2 different people, that will cause sort of variations just according to those 2 people. Add another person to the mix, sort of gets a lot wider exponentially. So once you've got 4, it's sort of, I think that's how we find this sort of incredible breadth of different quartets. And actually for us, we're very lucky because all 4 of us, unlike some other quartets, come from very, very different backgrounds, different corners of the world, and I think that really means that all four of us bring very different things to the quartet, and this, to me, makes it even more exciting. But certainly, all quartets sound different because I think each human being has different priorities of what they want to do within the quartet, outside of the quartet, with the music. And so that's when it becomes very exciting, because you have all of these different people coming together in groups of four.
So one assumes that it just feels like a very complicated but wonderful marriage, where instead of...
It's even more complicated, I would say.
Even more complicated than one. Okay, I can't even imagine that. But in terms of integrating new members, you've clearly had two wonderful new members adding to the group. And I should, of course, mention that we are talking to Bryony and Johannes here. I should have mentioned that right at the beginning, but I'm sure you know already. But so you've integrated two new members into the group. So how do you go about that, and how long does it take?
Well, first of all, when we looked for new members for our quartet, we believed very much in a sort of organic way of finding these people, rather than, I mean, we actually had some auditions for the cello position, but that was kind of just to sort of see how much interest there is and what kind of people might exist that we don't know about and so on. But actually, in the end, Sinead, who joined, was an old acquaintance of Brian, who had been to the same kinds of chamber music contexts like all of us, and had this similar kind of very early love for chamber music that had been rooted in her, the same as all of us, and so on. So, and we were sort of hanging around the same area of the planet, and generally speaking. And so I guess you could say that when we looked for new members, we really chose our members with the heart rather than with the brain, because it's like going back to this metaphor of a marriage. Ideally, you want to be in love with the person that you marry, and it's the same with quartet, really. And it's a lot. Not only is it important because you spend so much time together, and you want to spend time with people that you enjoy spending time with and that you're inspired by in rehearsals and so on. But also, we believe that only through that kind of relationship that is built on you know, basically a very, very deep appreciation for each other, can the real, genuine music come out. So that's
the truth of it. Yeah. So, how much time do you spend together over a year, Brian? Do you want to?
I can't remember the number of days, but I think it's easier to say it like this. Most of the year we are performing concerts very regularly and rehearsing very regularly, and then we take off around 2 months per year, once in the summer and once for Christmas. Sometimes we will take sort of slightly extended periods off throughout, but basically the rest of the time is quartet time. So it's basically full time, and we really do prioritize quartet over everything else, and that allows us to have the ultimate flexibility to do what we want to do as a group, which is ideal.
Yes. And in terms of resolving musical difference, does that come through conversation? Does it come through playing? Does it come through performing? Perhaps, Johannes, you could answer that.
Well, that's interesting. I think, in a way...
Assuming you have any, right?
Yeah, I think that we do, but... I mean, it happens sometimes that we have disagreements, but most of the time I think we don't see different points of views as like mutually exclusive, but we always try to integrate. Even if it seems like two people have actually the opposite idea, we really try to integrate the essence of both of those ideas into something that then becomes our idea. So it ties together with what you said before, Brian, that we have different backgrounds, and we want to harvest that. We don't want to just, go with one person's idea. And I mean, maybe sometimes that happens because we don't have enough time to rehearse, so we just have to. But then the thing is, in string quartet, let's say you're playing a Beethoven quartet, you'll be playing that for 30 years onwards. So just because you make one decision at a certain point in time, that really doesn't mean that that's the sort of ultimate decision of the quartet or anything like that. I think that we see our whole process and our interpretive process in particular as something very gradual and always flexible and always open to change. So yeah, I would say rather than resolving differences, we kind of create a
synthesis.
Synthesis. Yes, great, exactly. Thank you.
Just how I do in my marriage at home with Katrin. So let's think about the program. Okay.
Yes.
So let's think about the program tonight. So why have you put this program together?
I think I'll let Johannes take that one as the programming manager for the quartet.
Yes, we all have different jobs, and this is one of mine.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Just before we go on, what are your different jobs?
There are many. We sort of try to split the responsibilities of running the quartet as equally as possible amongst all of us. The list of different responsibilities is perhaps too long for me to say for now, but a few sort of main things that we manage are finances, which is my department. Laia manages the travel. Sinead looks after accommodation. Johannes is the programming manager and social media manager. So there are lots of different things that we really do try to sort of even it out, because otherwise it's just too much for one person to manage. And it's funny because I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about getting management. We absolutely adore our management and our agents, but unfortunately, even though they work incredibly hard for us, we still have other work to do on top of that. So it really takes a lot to run a string quartet.
Absolutely. So back to the program. Thanks, Barney.
Right. Well, this program is, I mean, you could say that it's a pretty standard program actually, because we start with a Mozart quartet and like an early piece from the classical era, and then we play this Razumosvsky Quartet in the second half, big Beethoven masterpiece. So this is tried and tested format. It's the piece in the middle that kind of makes things a little bit more interesting. In this case, this Takemitsu piece called Away Alone, and I mean, this is something that we try to do as often as possible, that introducing pieces that maybe aren't played as often as they could, and by putting them in, this is somewhere where I feel like the identity of an artistic group like us really comes forth, because you can explain a lot about why you put together programs like you do, but in the end it also comes down to taste. Like, we just think that Mozart and then Takemitsu just make a really good pairing. And that is kind of subjective in a way, but I would argue that it's quite an informed subjective opinion, so to speak, because we have been exploring string quartets now for 10 years actually. So we feel like we're in a position where our ability to put things together into programs creatively, more or less so, offers something to audiences. And a combination like this, we think, offers something a little bit unique and special to audiences. The opportunity to introduce something that's perhaps the first time that you hear it, but in the context of something that is more familiar, and yeah.
So let's think about the first half. I mean, I absolutely love Takemitsu's work. I actually feel somehow in a strange way that he's in the room when I'm even playing pieces by him because he is of our time in a way that playing a Mozart piece is a historical artifact, whereas Takemitsu's, you know, he was composing in our time. I don't know whether you feel that, but in terms of the similarities and the difference between those two pieces, I mean, let me think about them. They're both, in their own way, perfect. But tell us a little bit more about Away Alone, because the whole concept of that piece around space, time, form, tonality, movement of bodies, it's so different to the Mozart. So help us understand that a little. Bryony or Johannes. But Johannes's eyebrows were slightly higher than yours, Bryony, but let's...
Well, maybe I can start by talking about the Mozart briefly, and then Johannes, you can say your usual spiel about the Takemitsu. But I think what's so amazing about the Mozart is this idea of conversation, the way that he uses so many different textures throughout the piece, and everyone has their sort of moment in the sun without it being obvious that that person's having their moment in the sun. And each movement is woven together so beautifully and with such a sort of compelling harmonic journey that just makes absolutely perfect sense. As you said, James, it's really perfect, the sort of overall journey that you go on in this key of E-flat major. He brings out these intervals, this octave that we open. There are octaves hidden all the way through the piece, and it's just a wonderful wonderful work in its sort of own sense. Whereas the Takemitsu.
Yeah, I think what you say about the Mozart, that everybody gets their time in the sun, but without being too obvious, that's like a really key part of Mozart, because if you compare it to Haydn, for example, where it actually is very obvious, and sometimes I like to think about Haydn. Many people say that he's like kind of like a comedian, very witty and so on. And then Mozart, he's more like a magician. Like he hides all the clever stuff that he does in a very, very subtle way. And in that sense, it's not that dissimilar to Takemitsu, because Takemitsu, this piece, by the way, the only work he wrote for string quartet, it's atonal, right? So Takemitsu was inspired. He had two great inspirations, and one was the Second Viennese School, and the other one was the French music, like Impressionists. And his own musical language is very, very unique, but you can definitely hear the influences of these two different traditions. However, even though it's atonal and sometimes dissonant, and although always beautiful, there is an aspect to this piece that I think really grounds it and makes it immediately connecting to audiences and listeners, and that is the wonderful idea that almost every single thing that happens in this piece, it comes in the form of a wave. So the gestures are all waves. There are small waves, there are big waves, there are loud waves, there are soft waves. The waves, they lead into each other, they amplify each other. Sometimes they're like undercurrents, and sometimes they're really splashing on the surface. And a lot of the time they're overlapping as well to create a beautiful influx and sort of complex structures of waves that unfold and then kind of ripple out. And so this is something that you can really follow from an instinctive point of view as a listener. And then the unique harmonic language of Takemitsu only serves those gestures in a truly spellbinding and magical way.
I'd love to talk more about both, but let's just touch on the Beethoven, but let's not talk about all of the Beethoven. Can we just talk about the second movement? Now, actually, I want to talk about keys, because E major is quite an important key for Beethoven. He uses it in quite a special way. So one part of the question is, how conscious are you of the change of key between movements? And the answer is probably very. And then, how do you feel about that second movement in that special key of E major? It's talked of as a brighter key, and Beethoven used it very rarely. There are certain keys that are associated with Beethoven's work, C minor for some of the very dramatic works, and E flat major for some of the more sunny works, perhaps. But E major is actually quite unusual, and he saves it for something a bit special. So how conscious of your keys, and how, and what do you think why do you think E major's this, what does it mean?
I have to think, I'm not sure whether he's used E major already in the other quartets before 59.2, but certainly in the later quartets I can think of very obvious examples of E major. But for me, certainly, I think that this movement is sort of a really ideal portrait of introspection. We go into our inner selves and we communicate from our hearts, not from our brains. And again, the journey of this movement is absolutely stunning because there's sort of a timelessness of it. I can't remember what the exact tempo, the sort of instructions at the beginning of it. Do you remember, Johannes? Molto adagio, but with something, right? With a feeling. Oh, yeah, hang on a second. My music's right here. Because this marking, I think, is very helpful, and it sort of goes to this stargazing thing. Si tratta questo pezzo con molto di sentimento. So treat this piece with a lot of feeling. And I think this idea of introspection really works with that, because it's not that we're sort of showing this really sort of extroverted out there movement. It's just it's a time for sort of almost meditation. And I think in a way this goes, it's a foreshadowing of what he writes later when he starts to talk about the deity and sort of looking up to the heavens and sort of, thinking about that.
You said it kind of very briefly there about the stargazing thing, and this is something that we have from a secondary source, Paul Czerny, the pianist who was a student of Beethoven, who said that Beethoven had told him this movement was about stargazing. And but I also think this is a very important twist, though, that stargazing for humans is this like it's a state of duality in a way, because you are observing the vastness of the universe, and that kind of sublime inspiration is very much tied to the introvert and to the feeling of sort of that you are very small and insignificant, but this is not in a bad way at all, but it's in a life affirming way. And this duality is something that Beethoven really captures in this movement. And I also thought it was interesting you mentioned C-sharp minor, because it's parallel key to E major, and this is always something that I found quite interesting, that his sort of, you could call it his opus magnum, the C-sharp minor string quartet. And I actually think it starts in C-sharp minor, finishes in C-sharp major, but the central movement's in A major. But anyway, C-sharp minor, when this Opus 131 in C-sharp minor starts, when you ask people what they think about what that music is about, people usually say something like the greatest question of the universe, or something like ineffable. In the not maybe in the stars, but in the like greater than the universe, or greater than us at least. So it's the parallel key to E major. So it's almost like they are somehow connected, but the C-sharp minor is the sort of troubled cousin of the E major, which just kind of stares out at the starry sky in awe. And,
as if there was peace in the world.
As if there was peace in the world, yes. And maybe the middle period Beethoven was a little bit more inclined to that kind of thinking than later on. Who knows? Yeah.
And I think we can talk about this in an intellectual way, but we experience keys in a really visceral way as well. You don't need to explain it; you just feel it most of the time. Now, I did promise a question and answer from the audience. If anyone has any burning questions they'd like to ask, there is one more question I really want to put to the group in the time we've got left. But did anyone want to comment or make any observations or ask a question? Yes?
You're obviously
there any you've had a look at and rejected? Just to paraphrase the question for those at home, you're obviously committed to contemporary music. Are there any composers that you've rejected for whatever reason?
Just to say, I think that the hardest thing for us is that every year we can only really learn or play a maximum of 12 to 15 quartets. And so what's really difficult for us actually is that it's not usually a matter of rejection, it's a matter of really wanting to play all of the repertoire out there, but simply not having enough time to dedicate to all of those different pieces.
Yeah, that's a really good answer, actually. Yeah, that's about it, basically. Yeah, we have never rejected a piece. No, not after looking at it and decided that it's not for us or anything like that. No, but it's actually most new pieces come to us in forms of commissions already that are tied to a project or something like that and planned years in advance. So that's why when sometimes we get approached. It might already be too late, or yeah, that's the only situation where we say no to playing new pieces. Actually, if they come to us a little bit too late and we already have our plates full. Yeah.
Super. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to ask? No, that's good, because it leaves me just time to ask my last question. So leaving aside the indisputable fact that the WMC audience is the best in the universe, I'm quite curious, going back to your international experiences, to understand how UK audiences compare to foreign audiences and how UK concert etiquette compares to foreign concert etiquette in 35.5 seconds each.
That's actually quite a tricky question. I think what's so unbelievable about the UK is this tradition of coming to chamber music concerts, and the fact that there are so many concert societies here. I come from New Zealand, which is obviously quite similar to the UK in many aspects for obvious reasons, but certainly doesn't have quite as rich of a music scene to this extent. So I think that sort of translates into the audiences being usually very knowledgeable and that it always feels like we're playing for audiences who most likely have heard the pieces we're playing, unless it is a new piece. And it's a nice feeling. You feel like you're on that journey together with them, and they're obviously very well behaved. But also, yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing actually when it comes to etiquette. I don't know about you guys, but I really noticed through COVID that everyone stopped coughing. It became this thing. It was just so silent. But actually, the good news is, I think that we've all gotten a tiny bit more comfortable with the idea that it's okay to cough during a concert. But anyway, yeah, that was more than 35.5 seconds.
That's fine. Then, Johannes, very quickly from your perspective, either or the concert.
Well, the only thing I'll say then is that in the Netherlands, you always get a standing ovation. Doesn't matter how you play, if you play well or not, so you get a standing ovation. So that's when we say that if we get a standing ovation, it's, we say that, wow, a lot of Dutch people in the audience tonight. Yeah, so this is
good that you can foresee the future.
Yes,
well, look,
exactly.
I'd like to sincerely thank both Bryony and Johannes for sharing really, really beautiful thoughts and ideas ahead of the concert, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank you very much.
See you later.